Welcome everyone to the Penske Racing Shocks webinar. My name is David Cook, the Business Development Manager for Mazda Motorsports. With us today is Josh Smith, Technical Specialist for Mazda Motorsports, Rick Harris, SCCA's Road Racing Technical Manager, Xavier Calderon with Spec Miata NASA, National Director, our pro drivers for the shock test at Carolina Motorsports Park, John Dean, and we anticipate Joel Miller and Randy Pobst will be joining, though they are at WeatherTech Raceway right now for the historics. From Penske Racing Shocks, Director of Competition, Aaron Lambert. We anticipate Bill Gartner, Director of R&D, to join, and we've got John Quinn, Technical Specialist as well. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining. The purpose of this webinar is for the panel to answer your questions regarding the move to the Penske Racing Shocks and its top mount kit starting January 2019 in Spec Miata. This shock package will be eligible for other classes as well. Via the Mazda Motorsports weekly newsletter we sent Tuesday, we asked for questions to be submitted in advance. However, we are hopeful to field additional questions via the questions box on your control panel in the GoToWebinar platform. Due to the number of racers and teams on this call, everyone's mic is on mute, other than the panel, of course. Ask additional questions or follow-up questions, which we encourage. Please type them into the questions or chat box. Try to locate that questions or chat box now. A member of this panel will either type a reply, verbally respond, repeating the question, or both. The webinar is being recorded. The questions and answers typed into the box will not appear in the recording. So to test and get comfortable with the questions box, if everybody would, please type in the words hello or another greeting. That'll be great. We'll see how this works. Later this afternoon, we will post the recording on YouTube and send all those who registered for this webinar an email with the URL link. Based on the niche content, it won't be posted on Mazda USA's YouTube site next Tuesday. We will integrate it into the weekly newsletter for others. Looks like we've got some hellos and appreciate you guys too. So thank you for being on with us. All right, so for those viewing this webinar via a computer, you can see we are on MazdaMotorsports.com. And we've got the panel with us, as I mentioned earlier. If everybody on the panel can mute, that would be great. A little bit of background noise. I will turn over the control to Josh Smith with Mazda Motorsports to give the overview of how we got here. Along the way, he will be answering some questions that have been submitted. Then he is going to turn it over to the drivers, with Randy Pobst and Joe Miller both being at Laguna Seca and a drivers meeting coming up. Josh will pose the questions to Joel, Randy, and John Dean first. If you have additional questions for them, type them into the questions box now or when they begin. Again, it could be follow-up questions. Then we will have to let them go. Thank you all for the support and participation. And I'm going to turn it over to Josh here in just a moment. But before I do, I want to make sure we're all on the same page. And as you can see, for those on the computer, I'm on MazdaMotorsports.com. I'm going to click on the Spec Miata article here, Suspension Evolving, with a picture of Randy Pobst. And we will take a peek here at the PDF. Only run through part of it. Some of this will answer some of the questions submitted, and then Josh is going to start really drilling into the questions that were posed, and of course anything on the questions box that you guys submit now. So I'm going to turn control over to Josh, and he'll start here with the Spec Miata vision. Thanks again, guys. All right, Josh, are you ready to go?
Yes, sir. Have you handed me control? There we go. All right. Thank you, sir. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. I'd like to thank NASA, SCCA, and Penske for all being on board, as well as our drivers, John, Joel, and Randy. I know Randy and Joel are busy at WeatherTech Raceway, so we will see them shortly. So we'll get started here. I'll cover what brought us to this today, what criteria we got to get here, and hopefully answer a few of the preliminary questions along the way. As you guys know, Spec Miata was approximately created about 17 years ago. Focused on low budget racing, a competitive environment. This is what really drove the class and drove us forward to continuing to develop the class. So honing in on some of the vision for Spec Miata, cost is a key factor in our decision here today, in our decision to move forward with testing. Although Spec Miata is not known to be the lowest cost in parts when it comes to a class, we also do not settle for good is good enough. We want to excel and achieve great things for our customers, for our racers, and for the community as a whole, considering overall investment and long-term investments for our community and how we make changes moving forward. So one of the key considerations is supply of parts. As most of you know, through this season, we have had a little bit of difficulty as a community acquiring the current spec shock. That created an environment in which we thought it was relevant to discuss bringing forth a new shock option. Due to difficulty getting the current shock, we set forth, and some other challenges with the current shock, as you can see listed here. It was originally an off-the-shelf street shock. It was never intended for this racing application or for the spring rates that we put into Spec Miata cars. To try to alleviate some additional expenses, we wanted to develop a purpose-built race shock for this class that could hedge some of the concerns of annual operational costs and potentially reduce that. So in moving forward, we had to identify some of the current problems with the shock and how we would like to address them continuing forward with a new shock. So as said earlier, incapable of dampening the car, it was pretty much an off-the-street shock shell, or off-the-shelf street shock. One of the major concerns for SCCA and NASA was a tamper-proof sealed unit. The original shock did not offer that. So again, highlighting some of these concerns, we wanted to work with the SMAC, the SCCA, NASA, and everybody to get on the same page of what our current concerns were and how do we address them moving forward. Some other opportunities we wanted to explore in moving forward was also benefits to the racers and benefits to the community. Contingency was not currently being offered. At-track support and marketing support are all some things that we took into consideration moving forward. So that being said, this is a highlight of what we thought as a community a Spec Series shock should offer for our competitors. Tamper-proof was at the top of the list. A tight shock tolerance was also at the top of the list. The current shock was incapable of holding a manufacturer tolerance that made it fair and competitive to the community as a whole. Along with a few other things, we wanted to fix other problems along the way: proper valving, proper height, proper bump stop, all specifically tailored for Spec Miata. So with the environment this year and with the current concerns and moving forward, this was the perfect time to do the due diligence and start testing and get a short-term and a long-term plan in place for the community and for our racers. So our short-term plan was to source shocks outside of the country, get them here as quickly as we could to continue the season, because we knew we couldn't make a change in the middle of the season. We needed to test it. We needed to vet this out. We needed to produce a viable product for the community moving forward. So that took a little bit of time. So in the short term, we worked on air freighting shocks over the country to keep the series moving for this season. That being said, our long-term plan was to go to a request for proposal. We initially engaged with our criteria that we set forth with the SMAC and with NASA, a request for proposal to multiple shock manufacturers to see what they would propose and bring up as a prototype to help us for our long-term testing plan and for at-track testing. So that brings us into our at-track testing plan. So we did a 4-day test at the beginning of August. We were able to conduct 4 consecutive days with 7 shock manufacturers. We rented 3 cars, a early car, a 99, and a VVT. We were able to run the early car at both weights for the class. We were able to also have access to 2 other cars as Hoosier was testing with us separately. They're the same day, as well as get some high quality drivers to help us fulfill the need for what this shock dampening package should be produced, along with the help of Todd Lamb, which is the Spec Miata Advisory Committee Chairman. He was able to test as well with Joel Miller, John Dean, and Randy Pobst. They were able to give us exceptional feedback as far as what we were looking for, everything from a novice driver, somebody new getting into the series, all the way up to a pro driver. We wanted a broad spectrum to be able to take advantage of this new shock. So Long Road Racing was there to assist in collecting all the data for us. They did an excellent job in collecting data over 4 days with the assistance of Penske Motorsports, as well as representatives from NASA. And we were able to test under varying weather conditions. It was quite surprising how much of a variety we got in 4 days. We went from everything from cool, damp mornings to hot, dry afternoons to occasional rain showers. We were able to test dry and wet conditions and everything in between. It was a good basis to select our shocks. We also were able to test on every tire option for both NASA and SCCA. We did some preliminary testing on a potential prototype tire. Really, again, covering all of our bases and getting as much done as we could in 4 days. Some of our key observers and supporters, as you can see here, representatives from NASA, SCCA, Hoosier, Mazda, Long Road Racing, and Penske Motorsports. So the execution of the test, broad view, we did over 32 hours of actual on-track testing, conducted over 1,000 laps. We changed 72 different combinations. With a majority of these, as we eliminated, we got more and more time on the final shock. This led us to a collective decision from the drivers, from Mazda, from SCCA, from NASA, from the SMAC, that the obvious choice ended up being Penske. We spent more time with Penske on the cars because they kept excelling and moving forward in our test procedure. It was essentially the benchmark from day one. And with that being said, David, I'm going to turn control over to you, and we'll refer to some questions for our drivers.
Great, thank you, Josh. So why don't you, if you would, start with John Dean. I know Randy Pobst is working on dialing in now, and seeing if Joel Miller can, but again, he's going to be in the middle of a driver's meeting here shortly. So start with John Dean with any questions you have for the drivers, and then we'll also pull from the questions box as well.
And Randy Pobst just signed on. Hi, everybody. Sorry.
Hey, Randy.
Randy, thank you for joining us.
I finally got the right numbers. Yes, my pleasure, everybody. Thank you. Hi, John. Hi, David. Hey, Randy.
So you're just in time. We're going to start with driver questions. From a driver's perspective, this is for either you or John, whoever would like to answer it. From a driver's perspective, is this shock easier to drive than the current shock, or is it more difficult? And if so, could you explain or elaborate as to why?
John, you were here first.
Okay, yeah, I'll take that. Yeah, I mean, we were we were able to test this shock, like Josh was saying, in a lot of different conditions. So that really helps to answer this question. And right from the get-go, the shock was the benchmark with everything we were testing. And from a driver standpoint, from a new driver to a pro driver, this was by far the easy choice. The shock is very very easy to manage on track. It's good over curbs. I found it excellent on rumble strips. It really managed the car over rumble strips on the exit without affecting the radius of the line that you're on. It was very easy to drive and it was fun to drive. So I think from that standpoint, it was the best choice for all levels of driver.
Randy, do you have anything to elaborate?
Yes, please. If I may add to this, at the risk of being rude, ever since Spec Miata first came out, I have felt the shocks were surprisingly underdamped. I didn't know what the shock was. I still don't know exactly what it was. I have my guess. But it felt like a street shock. And so what happened was when I turned the wheel for a corner, the Spec Miata would just fall over and slam down on the bump rubbers. And I was very frustrated by that because I know everybody had good reasons for going that direction, but I thought, this whole class is stuck with this shock absorber that's too soft. And it makes it more difficult to drive because the body is not the weight. There's not good weight management. The stock shock falls over. It flops. And the fact is that virtually every shock we tested, and we tried a lot of them, didn't we, John? Every one of them was better than the original spec. And the Penske was at the top. There were others that were also very good. That especially, I know that I liked a couple of them a lot too. But the reason that I like these racing shocks is that they're properly damped. So when we turned for the corner, the roll was controlled. I've always thought Spec Miata had too soft a spring also. I don't think that anymore. With proper damping, the spring now feels just great to my seat of my pants. And it's much easier to drive. It's because the car is now properly damped and it feels more like a real race car. It's not stiff. We had a couple options that were, and we turned them down for that reason. They were harsh. They'd gone too far. But this Penske just has a beautiful, proper damping. So when you turn the wheel, the weight transfers under control. And I think it's going to be a lot easier for the regular Joe driver. And I think the top guys are going to appreciate it because it's also easier and they can go faster and the tires last longer.
Thank you, Randy. Moving on, we got two more short questions for the drivers. We know you guys have a tense schedule today. So one of the questions was the longevity or duration of a run in this shock compared to the old package. How did it compare? How did it stack up? And can you elaborate on how it was able to achieve what it did over the duration of a run from a driver's perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it was really neat being able to test the way we did with three of us on the track at one time, and we were able to do back-to-back comparison with I believe it was Randy was on the Penske's and I was on another shock manufacturer as well as Joel. And near the end of the session, we're kind of looking across the track and we're taking split times. We're monitoring our lap times. We were trying to avoid drafting and stay on separate parts of the track to keep that variable out. But we noticed as we got to about the 30-minute mark, Randy was he was 2 seconds or more a lap faster, and it was you could tell it was much easier to drive. There was a lot less tire degradation. So the Penske was really able to manage the level of performance over a long time, and I believe we ran an hour straight that run just to see what tire degradation was going to be and how that was going to be different from each shock manufacturer to the next, and it was, I mean, it was really easy to see. And driving the car, it was a handful at the end of that at that hour just to keep the car on track. And you're watching Randy's car, and it looked like it was a lot more effortless for him.
Randy, any perspective from your seat of the pants on that same scenario?
Yes, sir. Really, the number one greatest advantage on the clock was over a long run. The longer we drove the cars, the greater the advantage of the racing shocks. And the Penske was actually one of the superior shocks at making the tire faster, longer. On one lap, I think we were actually pretty close. Even with the old shocks, we could turn a pretty good time on one lap on fresh tires. But the difference after a few laps and the longer you ran, the bigger it was. It got to be pretty tremendous. I mean, when you're talking 2 seconds, that's forever in a Spec Miata. Are you kidding me? Yeah. So that is a great advantage, is that the proper damping makes the tire last longer. And I'm going to hypothesize that the reason for that is that the tire is not getting shock loaded all the time by being underdamped and then slamming down on the bump rubbers. And as you Spec Miata guys know, a lot of people choose to lower the car to where it's running the bump rubbers all the time. And they do that because the car's not controlled. So you're better off just leaning on the bump rubbers in the first place. But of course, that's not a progressive spring rate. It gets very stiff very quickly when you compress a bump rubber. And that's hard on the tire because it shocks it, overheats it, causes more wear, causes more slide. And the Penske shocks keep the car more hooked up. I mean, I think the class is going to just love them. I know I did.
Thank you, gentlemen. David, do you see any recently submitted questions that are directed towards our drivers before we release them to go back to their at-track duties?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Going through those now, trying to answer some as well. So let's see. Apologies. We've got some questions on supply, on even a return of the old Bilsteins. What part of the current Bumpstop kit will we be reusing? I don't think the drivers need to tackle that one. We can come back to it. Is Randy ever not happy? I think he always is, always smiling.
Hey, I'm always happy when I go from a street shock to a race shock and I'm on the racetrack. That's the bottom line.
We got one here from Chris. People keep saying that you will want to stay off the bump stops. Can you elaborate on that? Thank you.
Certainly. Go ahead, John.
Go ahead, sorry.
Certainly, we can elaborate on that. We're going to bring Bill and Aaron in from Penske to probably get into the details on that one. But to compare it to the current bump stop is a soft foam, and basically it was being used as a crutch to bolster up the dampening forces. The new bump stop is going to be specifically tailored not only in shape but in durometer rating. And I'm going to let Bill or Aaron discuss it further from there as to how it will be slightly progressive, but will ramp up for protection, and it will not be beneficial to ride on it. Aaron, Bill, are you available to answer that question for us?
Yeah, we're here. Thanks for that. The bump stop itself, for what we've done in racing, the bump stop is usually there for really just a travel limiting device. We want to stay off that as much as we can, mainly because the damping side of it, if you can control it, is going to be much more accurate for tire wear, for driver feel, and things like that. So what we've done by just going with a proper shock and proper damping levels, we really reduce the need to even get onto the bump stop. It's really going to be there for a travel limiting device, so you're not going to hurt anything else on the car. So from a performance standpoint, by trying to get into that bump stop, it's going to be less beneficial over just riding on the proper on the shock itself. For instance, we go to Daytona. When we go there for a 24-hour endurance race, the only reason we run bump stops is because we go from a flat infield to the banking, and the aero loads force us to get onto the bump stops. But when you try to ride on the bump stops on the infield, the handling is much, much worse. So again, if you have a proper functioning shock, you really don't need a bump stop. So that's really going to come down to when we do some more testing. We're going to do some shaker testing as well, and that's going to really fine tune exactly the bump stop package and how much travel and things like that the end user is going to need.
Thank you, sir. And we would like to circle back to the drivers and their input from testing when we were spending a little bit of time particularly tuning the bump stop. What was your take on that and how we were tailoring the package as the progression of the test moved on?
Randy, okay, Randy will go first here. The purpose, as I understand it, for a bump stop is exactly as our Penske friend there explained. It's to reduce damage from being bottomed on extreme bumps. It's not something that you normally even contact. It would be on a curb or in a hole or if you go off-road. And the reason you don't want to be on that bump rubber is that it's not a progressive spring rate. It causes the spring rate to go straight up very rapidly, which puts a shock load on the tire, which is not good for grip. Tires don't like to be shocked. And that's the beauty of a proper shock absorber. And if people are saying that we need to stay off the bump rubber, I think more what maybe somebody in the know is saying is that you can stay off the bump rubber. That's the advantage of having a properly damped shock, that it slows the weight transfer, reduces the ultimate suspension travel by dampening it. That's where it comes from, so that you can actually run the car a little higher and use the suspension for its intended purpose without getting the shock loads from being bottomed. That's the beauty of it. That's why I'm happy. I get excited about it because the Spec Miata is going to take a giant leap towards being a real race car now, more of a real race car.
John, anything to add from your perspective on that?
Yeah, absolutely. In testing, we were able to run quite a lot of curbing, and at that track you kind of have to be fast anyway. So we were driving the cars as hard as we could and going over the curbs just like you would in real life racing. So we were jumping over the curbs, and with the current spec bill signs, there was quite a few times where I could feel I bottomed the shock and hit the bump stop, and it's not friendly. It's not the right way of setting up a shock. And like the Penske guy was saying, it's there to save the shock, not to set the car up around it. So now, with the Penske, as we were on track with it, I never struck a bump stop. Never even thought about hitting the bump stop. It was very manageable over the curbs, and very, very compliant. So hopefully we won't have to worry about just smashing into the bump stop all the time with a shock that actually has some compression bump control.
Thank you, sir. David, any last questions for our drivers? Did we cover that one well enough for the initial question?
Yeah, it appears so. I think, guys, you're good to go. I don't see any that is necessary for you guys to answer. If I'm mistaken, please type in a question real quick before we let them go. And maybe while you're doing that, just in the event that you are, again, Joel, John, and Randy, really appreciate all you guys have done to get us here, and then being available for this call with the community. Good luck out there at Laguna Seca, and we'll catch up soon.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for joining in, too.
Thank you.
Thank you, David, and congratulations on creating such an incredible, thorough test over those 4 days. I mean, we tried everything, and I'm happy to be part of it. Good luck, you guys.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you, gentlemen. All right, David, do you have any questions you want to address quickly in the question box, or should I continue with the submitted questions? I was going to move. Actually, you were next in line. I had a couple questions for you.
Sure. We do have several questions here that I want to run through, but why don't you go ahead and hit me with the one that was asked beforehand, get through what you need to, and then we'll circle back on these right after.
Yes, sir. So first question that I will direct your way is a contingency-related question. Could you highlight 2019 Penske contingency? Will it be continued for 2020 was the original question. And for SoCal, the example was, will all finishers 1 through 10 be paid out is the $125 for contingency?
Yeah, really appreciate that. So Penske Racing Shocks is contributing funds to the Penske Racing Shocks bonus, and understanding that this is a significant investment for many to go from what we're used to with kind of a street shock pricing to a real race shock from Penske. Now, we worked very hard on getting a phenomenal price. Penske is really, through economies of scale and more, able to achieve a price way less than the value of the shock is. Having said that, it's still more than we're used to. So we're bolstering the contingency as well. So between Penske and Mazda, we've got significant contingency for 2019 set. As you can see here on slide 38 of the PDF, it'll also illustrate for each of you how far we're paying down, at least for the SCCA here, and then for NASA as well. Then there's certificates from Penske that it'll be providing as well. There's many more benefits that Penske Racing Shocks is providing above and beyond contingency. But we do plan, and it is agreed upon between Penske and Mazda, that contingency will continue after 2019 to help with this investment. It just won't be as significant as it is in 2019. It won't be nearly as much, but it will still be significant in 2020 and on. Again, just not as significant as the 2019 amounts.
And thank you, David. The next question was an availability question. When can we expect these shocks to be available and start shipping?
We are working with Penske Racing Shocks on a few items to make sure that we get additional testing and refinement, but our timetable is by Thanksgiving. So towards the end of November. It may be sooner than that. It could be as early as October, depending on some things, but I would count on November for availability.
And from Mazda's perspective, is there a plan for any future changes in Spec Miata coming as far as Mazda is concerned?
No changes, nothing like this. This kind of got sprung on us, and we understand the impact that it has for individuals. Particularly, we're very sensitive to people who have just bought Bilsteins after waiting for months, and then this happens. We believed that it was still important to launch this for the overall good of the community and to safeguard this program and to candidly just enhance more value. We are working on other initiatives that will affect Spec Miata along kind of the same vein of always trying to provide more value. So we do have, for example, engine kits, transmission kit, and hardware kit that's going to be released September 3rd. A lot of stock parts in those, and we worked with our OEM stock parts pricing group to reduce prices for a lot of those parts and put those kits together so you can buy the parts separately or in kits. Either way, you get the price reduction. And we're going to continue to chip away at providing more value for Spec Miata and for other classes. But if the question is really about, are there any more, big surprises? No, just hopefully more value.
Thank you. Anything you would like to address in the question box that's maybe for you or for myself before we move on to questions for Bill, Aaron, and John from Penske?
I appreciate it. Yeah, keep rolling, Josh, and then I'm gonna just go through this list, which is mounting.
Got it. Will do. Bill, Aaron, you with us? You ready for? I got about 5 questions for you guys that were submitted previously.
Go ahead.
So one of the first questions is in relation to the shock body and stroke lengths of the new Penske and compared it to the Bilstein. What are they going to be? What process do we use to determine them? And anything you feel that you need to elaborate on, please feel free.
Yeah, guys, this is Bill. So compared to the Bilstein, there will be a little bit more travel available, but what we have to do is adjust that, having to do with the new bump stops. So, and secondly, with the mechanical limits of the suspension itself, there's at the rear there's only so much stroke that you can add in before you have metal to metal contact and things like that. I think where this system will benefit is, the bump stop will be a bit shorter, so you can get into that travel and use that travel without hitting the bump stop more effectively. Secondly, like we said, with the damping adjustment, with the damping supporting the car, you're not going to get as much travel into the bump stops as you normally would anyway. So in the end, we can't. Oh, go ahead, Josh.
No, sorry, I thought you were done. Keep going.
Just going to say, so it's in development to get you guys the maximum amount of usable stroke within the mechanical limits of the suspension and with the new bump stop.
So a follow-up question along the same line. Can you help outline in comparative the old bump stop to the new bump stop and maybe just what we could expect out of the new rate? I know that it is going to be finalized in testing on the shaker rig, as well as one more on-track test. If you could just outline the goal of the new rates and where it's going in that direction.
Yeah, this is Aaron at Penske. So the new rate itself, anybody who's familiar, if you're not, with typically what NASCAR has been doing, a lot of the teams there are using different materials and things like that. So the diameter of the material itself is going to be quite a bit stiffer. But again, it's where a foam bump stop is more of I'd say a OE style type bump stop. This is more of a race end bump rubber. So the rate is much higher, and we can tune that rate. It's not just going to be a straight linear rate. It doesn't have to be, but that's what the shaker rig is going to tell us of what we want it to do. But ultimately, the diameter of the material, the size of it, the length of it, all that will be determined with this next round of testing, and then eventually the shaker test. So the rubber itself, it's not your normal foam bump stop or anything like that. So.
Thank you. And in regards to the shaker rig, we have a couple questions that are all in the same ballpark regarding ride heights, common measurements. Can you give us a summary of the type of information we can expect to get out of the shaker rig? Is it going to give us a sweet spot in some key areas to use this new shock moving forward?
Yeah, ultimately that's what we use the shaker rig for. So we're going to have a sort of a criteria that Mazda sort of presents to us on different ride heights, different weights. And what we'll end up doing is running through all those iterations. And what the rig's going to tell us is it's going to give us a parameter of numbers that we can look at and based off pitch heave, mechanical grip, based off the tire contact patch, it's going to give us the optimum settings. And then from there, we can present that data, and you're going to very easily be able to see what results did what, or what setups produced what results on the rig, and go with it from there. Ultimately, what we will end up finding is when you do crash into a bump stop like you're currently doing now, the mechanical grip usually goes away pretty quickly. But again, those are all results that, based off track testing and then going to the shaker rig, we'll be able to present a really nice report and analyze and tell you what all it means.
And two questions that are directly related. What do you see as the largest gain from switching to this new package? Is it going to be performance-based? Is it going to be reliability-based? And to tag on to that, what, as far as an engineering side of things, makes this shock shine over the long run? What keeps you guys performing where the other ones are falling off?
I think for what you can expect is probably all the above. Repeatability, consistency, and performance. Those are all the key areas. For us, the markets that we work in, that's what racing is. I mean, racing is going out and pushing the limit, all while being consistent and repeatable. If you can do it once, that's great, but you got to be able to do it multiple times. And when we're working with a series and a car like this, we know it's all about being equal. That's what it's about. It's about drivers learning how to drive and making sure everybody's in the same car. So for us, the repeatability side is huge. And honestly, all of that comes from our engineering side. We live and breathe in the racing world, so our tolerances are very tight, but they have to be that way to create repeatability. Whether we're dealing with NASCAR teams or Formula One teams, that is their biggest point of emphasis, is making sure one set matches the next set, so there's no deviation there whatsoever. So we're simply just taking what we've done over the last 20, 30 years of being in business, and we're applying it to what you guys are doing now. And the performance side of it, that's a great thing. But everything else that goes along with it is just as important, for sure.
Thank you, sir. That concludes the directed questions towards you guys for the submissions prior. I'm sure we'll have a couple follow-ups here in the Q&A following. Moving forward, we have a couple questions I want to direct towards SCCA Rick Harris and NASA's Xavier. One major question we're getting asked is, will there be a ride height rule implemented with this change? Rick, would you like to start with that question on your side?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, obviously this is a subject that's come up quite a bit, and I guess the answer to the question, yes, it's possible. I think with the information that Penske has been giving us and that the drivers' feedback is that with the properly dampened shock and it operating in a optimal sweet spot, that we may not need a ride height rule. We may have a ride height suggestion for optimal performance based on the shaker test and the next on-track test sessions that we will have. So there is a letter in our letter log system right now that came out of a result of of our board of directors and the CRB, which is now the RRB, it's the Road Racing Board. It came out. So there's a letter in our system, and we'll be monitoring it going forward. But as of right now, we will not be mandating a ride height rule.
Thank you, Rick. Xavier, is NASA share similar concerns or similar viewpoint for the same question?
Yes, we do. We have been in communication with a lot of the SCCA folks, and we're also monitoring, and we'll probably most likely just kind of make sure that everything falls steady, and we'll be good to go, and we're just managing it the same way.
Thank you, sir. Next question we had was directed towards rule sets as well. Is there any plan to change spring rates in the future for Spec Miata? Rick, would you like to start us off with that one?
Sure. For right now, there is not even a suggestion that we'll change the spring rate in the future. And Penske can correct me if I'm wrong, but these shocks will be optimized to a plus or minus 100 spring rate change. Should we ever think about changing the spring rate in the future, the shock will be still properly damaged to that up to that 100 plus or minus range.
Yeah, I mean, based off, we could do some testing there for sure. Our damping range can always be adjusted slightly, but typically changing that type of rate is not an issue. Ultimately, it comes down to what your driver preference is and feel, and ultimately what we're trying to do, whether it be longevity for tire wear, curbing, things like that. So as the landscape changes a little bit, if you had to go in a different spring rate, it's not like this shock would be a toss away shock and you got to totally revamp it by any means.
And last question for SCCA and NASA is, how will each of you be teching this at the track?
Okay. So obviously this was a point of interest for both SCCA and NASA going forward, as we had some challenges teching the previous platform. So we worked with all the shock manufacturers that were at the test, and specifically Penske as we started winding down. So Penske will have a serial number stamped into each shock that's sold through Mazda, and we will be privy to the database of those serial numbers. So we'll know that they were sold through Mazda. And two, we will have the dyno chart matched up to that serial number. So we'll be able to dyno shocks at the track to see if they fall within the range of the way they came off the factory, based on a plus or minus 5% graph accuracy and dyno session. So that's one way we'll be able to tech. The next way is a visual on the tamper-proof seal that's crimped around the top edge of the shock, coupled with potentially the Mazda Motorsports etched logo that will be in a strategic location that we would be able to tell within just a quick glance of the eyeball whether that shock was even think about getting tampered with. So a couple of quick visuals will tell us, and then if we have any suspect whatsoever, we'll take the shock and have it dynoed.
Xavier, anything you would like to elaborate from NASA's perspective?
No, nothing new. The 5% tolerance was a really big factor when we were coming up with the specifications on this shock, so Rick nailed all the right points, and that's about right.
All right, and one last thing that since we're on questions for you guys is in regard to moving forward with the new shocks and the new Bumpstop kit, top mount kit. How are you implementing? Is it required for the new shocks? Can you backdate? Can you update? Will you just clarify the rule set moving forward for us?
Okay. Yeah, I think both Xavier and myself, we've gone back and forth and have agreed to the shock will first be mandated at the SCCA runoffs in 2019 and then the NASA championships in 2019. It's certainly an option leading up to that for teams and drivers to continue on the current shock. But when next year's championships roll around, they'll be mandated. And then the follow-on to that, in January of 2020, the major super tours for the SCCA will be mandated to be on the Penske shock at that time.
Understood. And just to clarify, the new Penskes will run the new Penske top mount bump stop solution for both series, and the Bilsteins will run the older Fat Cat bump stop solution for both series until the time frame you just laid out takes effect.
Right, and obviously there will be no interchanging of bump stops or between the two shock manufacturers.
Yes, sir. Thank you for clarifying that. David, just a moment while I read through the rest of the questions, make sure I didn't miss anything. If you have anything you want to ask real quick while I do that, feel free.
Yeah, appreciate it. And some of this may be repetitive, so if I ask a question and you guys that the panel feels has already been answered, please just say so, and we'll go to the next one. What parts of the current bump stop kit will we be reusing?
The answer to that one, David, would be none of the current kit will be reused when moving to the Penske's. The new bump stop top mount kit from Penske will be a spherical ball bearing at the top, and the tailored bump stop solution that we have outlined with Bill and Aaron briefly there. So none of it will transfer.
Great. And if you stay on the current Bilstein, then you would be reusing all of it. And next question.
Hey, David.
Sure.
Hey, this is Aaron at Penske. We did want to clarify that the existing threaded collar and spring mount threaded sleeve, that the existing ones that customers have will and can be used on these shocks.
Great. Thank you, sir. And this may have been answered already. How will we address ride height going too low?
That is twofold. NASA and SCCA are monitoring if a ride height rule will need to be implemented. They are actively doing that, as well as the new additions to the bump stop and how we're going to tailor the rate, size, and shape of the bump stop are all going to be preventative measures to keep the cars from going too low and causing alternate issues.
Great. What is the service interval of the shock?
I think you initially had in the one release, David, we're recommending 100 hours, and then to have the shock service after 100 hours, which I think you guys outlined is probably 1 year's worth of use.
Yeah, I think based on testing, it could be, but if we're going on 4 hours a weekend for a race weekend and 6 weekends in a year, if someone's doing that, it'll definitely take them through a few years. And in some of the divisional could even go further. So Penske will be at many events. We're going to get a schedule out, once finalized, and Penske will have a dyno at the track. So at that 100 hours mark, it'd be recommended to get them dyno, get them inspected. Now, if you don't see them at the track, Penske, of course, has a service here in the United States, so you can ship them to Penske Racing Shocks for dynoing and then potential service. Would that be fair to say, Aaron and Bill?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, the at-track support is definitely going to be quite a bit more than what they're used to currently. And then also our facility here, we turn products around very quickly. And what we'll end up doing, we'll have a place on our website that you can very easily click on, get the form to get the shock sent in, and typically it's under a week. We can have the shock service turned around and back to you.
That's super fast from our experience. That's great. Thank you very much for that service. All right. Interested in required setup changes between the shock packages, cross, ride height, camber, caster toe, tire pressures. So from Jason, interested in required setup changes between the shock packages, ?
This is going to be based on our experience and results from the shaker. We still should achieve the same caster, camber, and ride height swings available previously, with the potential to actually have more availability of usable ride height. But to determine if there will be anything required. Further testing will support that. Again, this is, what the shaker rig is really going to summarize for the majority of people.
I believe the answer to this one's been addressed from a different question. I'll pose it nonetheless. As this is a sealed shock to prevent tampering, are there provisions to have used shocks tested to ensure they still maintain the damping rates and or rebuild used shocks?
Are they referring to the old Bilsteins or to the new Penske's?
I think that the new Penske's, it's from Keith. Keith may type in here for clarification, but as this is a sealed shock to prevent tampering, are there provisions to have used shocks tested to ensure they still maintain the damping rates and or rebuild used shocks? And again, I think since this is a rebuildable shock from Penske, again, they'll be able to dyno at many of the tracks, or you could send in, and that way you can ensure the rates and then, if necessary, rebuild. So I believe we did cover this one. So Keith, if we've misunderstood, please maybe if you could just restate or reframe, that would be super. And then it looks like Kendall's question was next. How much shock distance compression will we have with the Penske's? With the Bilsteins, we only had about 3/4 inch at race ride heights.
Phil or Aaron, I'm going to refer to you on that one. As far as, are we still determining that with the shaker or not? Or do we have any kind of final numbers that we could ballpark?
Yeah, so I think the travel from the ride height is going to be determined by our bump rubber testing. We're going to push for the maximum amount, obviously. But as we mentioned, with so much support from the damping, the sweet spot of the car is probably going to be a bit higher than it was in the past. So that, yeah, from the shaker rig and from the track testing is going to be determined.
And while we're on a similar subject, could you elaborate a little more as to the tamper-proof capabilities of the Bumpstop? That was something we didn't address earlier. What measures you take and compare it to the old foam stop, and how the new one just cannot be tampered with without destroying it?
Yeah, so the Bumpstop itself is it's going to be a polyurethane bump stop, and those are offered in certain colors based off the durometer. So the durometer that we end up going with is obviously limited in what color selection you can have, and also the actual the dimension of the rubber itself. So it's going to be pretty easy for an inspector to look at the bump stop as well to see, has it been changed. Again, it's pretty popular type of material that's run in NASCAR and other areas, other top forms of racing. So we're pretty well experienced with it. And again, it's going to be pretty hard to tamper with that without somebody being able to see very easily.
Now, could you alter or change it by drilling it or soaking it, or would both of those be very detectable?
They'd be very detectable, not so much the soaking of it, but that's not really going to do much for the type of material that it is. If you were to drill it, that's been done before, and it takes the longevity of that bump stop and brings it down drastically to where if you do get into it, it splits and sort of breaks the rubber apart very quickly. So by doing that, you could do that, but you're going to run the risk of now not having a bump stop, and now metal to metal is going to happen, and that's typically going to be something on the car. So it probably wouldn't be a wise thing to do.
And
from the
one last
side,
thing.
sorry. From the engineering
Go ahead,
side,
Bill.
just the polyurethane is almost impossible to change. The material is what it is, versus a foam where you can inject things inside of it and deteriorate the core and things like that. So it's a much more stable material.
And would one of you be willing to explain briefly what the rebuild process of the sealed shock would be? I think that might have been what the previous question was leaning towards. Now that I've had a little time to think about it, is describe the process of how you would rebuild a sealed tamper-proof shock and what the customer gets back in return.
Okay, so the sealed tamper-proof shock side of it, going through and working with a bunch of different sanctioning bodies throughout the years, in the end, we know racers are going to try to do whatever they can if it's available to them. So ultimately what we've done, the body itself is going to be crimped to the end seal, which makes it impossible to take apart. You can't loosen the shaft assembly out of the body without destroying it. So if you're to do that, you now have to obviously replace the body, which is not going to be made available to anybody to buy. So that there sort of eliminates anybody from wanting to try to do that. From our standpoint, what we will do in-house and what's included in the service is you're going to get a brand new body on your shock that's included in the service. And there's two good things about that. One, it makes it very easily to make it tamper-proof. The second thing is, for the end user, the body is definitely one of the higher wearable items, which causes inconsistencies. So in paying for a service, you're going to get that body replaced and get that damper back to like new condition.
And what is the cost of the service? I don't believe we've covered that yet.
The cost of the service is $100 per shock. That includes new oil, shims, and seals, body and shaft bearing, and it also includes a dyno before and after.
All righty. Thank you, sir. David, I believe that wraps up all my submitted questions. If you have anything else to continue with.
Thank you, Josh. And out of respect for everybody's time, these have been some great questions, but we know that people are needing to run off as well. So we've got several more questions here posed in the question box, which is great. What I'd like to ask the panel to do is to take a look at those questions and see if we can't maybe expedite answering some for those individuals. Now, we will stay on and answer them verbally, but in the event that it takes us 20 minutes to get to it and you need to run before then, hopefully one of our panel can answer your question before that time. So we'll keep on starting here with another question from Kendall. What's the difference dimensionally between the two shock bodies? I don't believe we've got them set yet, but Penske, can you tackle this one, at least for your shock body?
Yeah, they're actually fairly close. The major difference is going to be how far we let that body travel. And as I mentioned, the mechanical limits of the suspension are what we're going to go by and what we're going to try to achieve, but then add the bump rubber into that to protect against metal to metal or any damage.
The diameter is going to be the same as the previous ones, also because we have to use the current spring and sleeve collar. So that dimension will be relatively unchanged, maybe a minute difference, but we are expecting to reuse parts, so that's going to be very close.
Okay. From Daniel, how sensitive was the car with Penske shocks to chassis changes, right high crossway camber? So now I wish we had one of our drivers still on. Josh, are you able to tackle this? Or I know the drivers continue to give feedback throughout. Perhaps John?
John would, I would lean on John a little bit, but being as the threaded collars are still the same thread pitch, the sensitivity of how much you're going to turn those collars is unchanged. So your crossweight percentages are still going to be relative to the percentage change directly related to how much you turn that collar still. So we're not increasing sensitivity or making a margin for error narrower. If anything, we're increasing the margin for error due to the damping capability of the shock. But I would lean on John for at-track tuning and changes. He was the one that was directly conversing with the drivers and getting the feedback and making the changes.
John Quinn, are you still with us, sir?
Yeah, thanks, guys. as far as that goes, in working with the drivers and all the changes throughout the 4 days, which was a really good 4 days worth of very valuable testing. Um, the setup procedure that the guys from Long Road and Panic were doing was very thorough. Each car was gone through very thoroughly with driver weight included. And I spent a lot of time watching them go through the setups. And as far as repeatability goes and how the dampers actually were affected by the coilover kits and what's used in the cars, you'll experience from the end user side, as far as setup goes, you'll experience no differences at all. And as far as the changes to the car, sensitivity from shock package to shock package, um, there wasn't a lot of adjustments from the baseline setup. In other words, the guys did a really good job bringing a baseline setup to the racetrack to work with to make that playing field level, to give a fair shake to all the shock companies that were involved with it. However, based off of experience with the cars and whatnot, the sensitivity as far as your setup will probably be a little less sensitive, basically because the damping is so much better in a shock. It's going to control the mass of the car a lot better than what the competitor's been used to in the past. So going forward, I think as far as setup goes and changes to the setup over a given weekend from a team standpoint or from a driver standpoint, it's going to be a lot easier to tune, and you'll have to actually move less mass, do less changing to get a good response out of your car, because the package will work a lot more efficiently.
John, thank you. So really a follow-up question regarding setup and what's expected. And this one's from Bob, but I see a couple others on it. Can we elaborate a little bit more as far as what our plan is to share setup information, some differences between what the community is currently used to versus what we're recommending, so that way right out of the box they're ready to go. And even more specifically with another test that we're going to conduct very likely at VIR, we can provide information on setup after that event as well. Is there anything that you guys would like to comment on as far as setup to put at ease some concerns and in relearning the car perhaps?
Let me just, John Penske here. Let me just share this little thought. As we move forward with testing of this package and developing the proper bump stop scenario, and then rolling all that track test that we do with our pro drivers over to our 7-post, we're going to be able to give the end user a very, very good outline on what the sensitivity difference is and what the changes from the old package to the new package are going to be. After we get across another good track test and do some good 7-post testing, we'll be able to generate a report for the end user that will give them a better idea of how their setups are gonna work with the new shock package. We just need to get all our data and get that provided to the community first.
Great, thank you. This may have also been tackled already, but did you change the ride height between dampers?
No, for our initial testing and trying to keep the playing field even, we kept the same ride height for all the dampeners. We took a common measurement from the lower mounting point of the dampener to the spring perch, because we wanted to keep variables out of the equation for ruling down and narrowing down dampeners as the test went on. We verified ride height, we verified cross percentages, and we verified all the alignment settings between each damper change. But we did not actively give or take an advantage or disadvantage by altering ride heights between the tests. We knew that the final results would be addressed on the shaker with whoever came forth as the victor in the testing, and a second testing at track. So that's where we're going to gather this information. The first set of information was just to narrow it down to who we wanted to move forward with.
Okay, thank you. All right, going to head to the next question regarding contingency, and one on SMSE. It says, fit into the contingency program. Where does it fit? If I understand correctly, we need to determine this, but our goal is to ensure that anybody running these shocks would be eligible to claim the contingency. Another question was, how long are the Bilsteins legal? I know we've addressed this already on the call, but essentially in divisional, regional from SCCA or NASA, as of right now, indefinitely. They'll look at seeking member feedback and tackling this later on, but certainly legal through at least 2020, if not longer. But majors competition, it would be required in 2020. Excuse me, so in 2020 for majors competition. And then, as mentioned earlier, I think by Rick, for the runoffs and NASA championships starting in 2019. Someone asked, will we get a copy of the presentation? So this will be recorded, and it will be posted on YouTube, so you get the answers there. And then as far as the actual PDF that we just scanned a few pages on and shared just a few, it is on MazdaMotorsports.com, and we'll share the link for this PDF again as well. Then we've got a question here on the topic of contingency rewards. Mazda Motorsports previously had issues with Champ Car submissions were made because Champ Car doesn't use an official timing and scoring. They use Race Monitor, etc. This question is for Mazda Motorsports. How will you work with Champ Car to formalize and honor their contingency submissions and save our team's grief when we try and submit race results? What I can tell you is Champ Car and us have been speaking on this topic and have also met here the last few months to form a stronger relationship and to make sure that this, among more, is resolved and provides a better value for the racer. That's our mutual interest. We've just accomplished it candidly with SCCA and NASA, a little bit better, a little bit easier. And again, appreciate both of those organizations, NASA and SCCA, being on this call. But again, we are excited to work with Champ Car in the future. All right. We got a question. Toyota contingency and Hawk are per race, but this Penske contingency is only for final standings or each race during the year. The contingency that we put out here is for end of the year. Ultimately, there of course will be regular per race as in the past or currently. This is just in addition and essentially a one-time $125 contingency to try to help offset some of this initial cost. But keeping in mind that Penske in particular really dropped the price on these shocks. The value of them, again, as I said earlier, is much higher than what's being charged. We really were sensitive to the price point and tried to get under the $200 mark. So there's not a lot of profit for either company in these shocks. It was really done because of our desire to provide value in grassroots, in club racing, in Spec Miata, and we see a lot of other benefits of doing that. And we do have contingency budgets, kind of a different bucket, even though the margins are so tight. But because we have this other bucket or these other buckets, we're able to pull from and really try to help make sure that that this is successful right out the gate. So hopefully that helps as well. With regard to contingency, there has been some internet rumblings that the shock was overpriced to essentially give back some contingency. Basically, the racers paying for their own contingency. As I read the PowerPoint presentation, it looks more like Penske sees the value of getting on board with one of the largest amateur race groups in the country and is not overcharging for the shock to generate contingency dollars. In my opinion, the value of the shock speaks for itself, but there have certainly been a few painting a different narrative. Can you comment at all on this? Just reading this question now, apologies. I hope that my previous comment does address this, but when you're getting a Penske shock for under $200, I hope that's clear, the value that we're getting, and there's not extra money really being generated as a result of this. Again, this was to try to better the community. That was the purpose of this and the pricing. Okay. From Emilio, more travel or more bump travel? I think that was probably a clarification to something that was being said quite a while ago. So apologies, Emilio, for just getting to this. When will the test results be posted? The test results from what we did are integrated into this this PDF. We just didn't share every bit of data because we didn't want to write another 40 pages. Candidly, but we are going to conduct, as I mentioned earlier, another test likely at VIR, and as Josh and others mentioned, a shaker test as well. All of that will be posted, and plenty of details regarding that data will be provided, or those data will be provided. We had a question on, please clarify the supply chain situation, how to start ordering, when you expect availability, etc. You can order now. Inventory should be in, by November, and it'll be eligible in racing January of 2019. It would go through MazdaMotorsports.com. Okay. How will the forces be affected over time? Hours of use versus what is being teched with what is being teched. Will old shocks fail tech? So this is from Ralph. Not positive I follow, but perhaps Josh or Rick or Xavier, you guys do. How will the forces be affected over time, hours of use versus what is being teched? Will old shocks fail tech?
I think that falls in the line of the tolerances that we're asking Penske to build to as far as the plus or minus percentage. So two-part, I think we would have to lean on the team at Penske to tell us what the life expectancy and the degradation of holding that tolerance would be over the life. And then second part of that would be, how do we determine a failure point as far as tech is concerned in SCCA and NASA's eyes? Bill or Aaron or John, would you care to answer the first part of that for us?
Yeah, I think so the tolerance that you guys are giving us is obviously considered a tight tolerance, but we operate really well within that 5 plus or minus 5%. We deal with other sanctioning bodies now that have similar spec shocks that are sealed, and customers simply send them in. Obviously, if they're worn out, it's going to be a softer shock, and the car is going to be ill handling. It's going to be in the racer's best interest to either keep it documented or just know what they feel like, get them checked when we're at the racetrack. And if they fall out of tolerance, obviously it's not going to be good performing on the car. So as far as that longevity goes, that 100 hours that we're targeting, the shocks are more than capable of handling that. That's not a problem. So the community knows the same pistons, the same body, the same metals and materials being used are the same materials that we use in our endurance racing, 24 Hours of Daytona, Sebring. Endurance racetracks around the world are running this exact same style shock. So it's not like you guys are getting anything lesser than what our quality race shocks are. So from a performance standpoint, longevity standpoint, we see really no issues with being able to achieve what you guys are asking for.
All right, another question here. Can Mazda or Penske include a bump stop, shock, top hat, assembly instruction for the people who are not as mechanically inclined if much assembly is necessary? With the previous Fat Cat bump stop kit, I did see a number of people install them incorrectly, most likely due to lack of directions.
Yeah, so this is Bill from Penske. the setup for this upper mount kit is going to be much simpler than the existing unit. There's really 3 parts to it, 4 if you include the bump rubber. We are going to supply some instructions and things like that, some torque specs and some Loctite specs. But you know, as far as tightening to the right torque or squeezing things down to the right amount, it's a spherical mount, so you tighten it to the correct torque and everything turns out correct. I think it was mentioned that there will be a slight modification to the steel upper mounts to open up the hole a bit. You know, that was to allow some misalignment of the shaft once the spherical mount is attached as well. But we'll certainly have instructions for you guys to get all that done correctly.
Wonderful, thank you. And I know Joel Miller from WeatherTech Raceway has joined us. He had a driver's meeting as mentioned earlier. So Joel, welcome. And Joel may be on mute there at the track, but I just did get a text from him saying that he is logged on. Will the Bumpstop ship with a shock order or need to place a separate order? So we do have a kit for the Bumpstop for the complete car, and I'm sorry, not the Bumpstop, for the top mount kit, and for the four shocks, the 2 fronts, 2 rears. So our recommendation would be to order for your first time the entire kit, which will be in price $1044 and change. And if you have any questions regarding that, certainly the information is in this article on MazdaMotorsports.com, or you could call 800-435-2508 and talk to a representative with us at Mazda Motorsports. Do you have a picture or drawings of the new shocks and mounts that you can share at this time, particularly the mounts? And I know we shared something here in the PDF, but Penske, are you guys able to tackle this one?
We have an initial layout. I mean, that's something we'd want to pass through Mazda first to say it's okay to publish. We have obviously engineering drawings and 3D drawings and things like that. And we also have the prototypes that we produced. If that's something Mazda says, yeah, we would forward them to them and then they could post as they see fit.
Great, and we absolutely would. Thank you. Okay, and it looks like I think we got Joel Miller back on audio. Joel, you with us, pal?
Yeah, hello guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, great. All right, so we've still got quite a bit of people on the call. It certainly has been longer than we anticipated. So we're going to keep going down with these questions. And Joel, we tried to tackle the driver questions first. So right now, with Randy and John having departed, you are our driver representative. So any driver questions, we're going to turn to you, so no pressure.
All right, no problem.
All right, great. So let's see what was next. What is the turnaround time for shock service? That was mentioned earlier, should be circa a week. If it's shipped in, if it's at the track, if it's at the track, can you tackle all of this at the track for a service bill, or does it depend?
I'm sorry, Dave, say that again.
So the question was, what is the turnaround time for shock service? And I know it was mentioned that if you ship in the shock for service, the turnaround time is, other than shipping, is circa a week. If someone wanted to get it dynoed and perhaps serviced at the track, would you guys be able to do that?
Yeah, we can definitely do that. I mean, that's something that's come up. I don't know from a time standpoint that would be valuable for the racer, but we do that with other sanctioning bodies. We'll be at the racetrack to test them. Again, it's something we're even looking at having some possible loaner shocks there. So we would take your shocks, give you a set of loaners to use, rebuild them at that point. Again, looking in the time frame of what a race weekend is, it might be difficult for the racer to do that. But again, it's something we will be at the racetrack and could possibly be done.
Great, thank you. Was any determination made regarding the current spring rates, if they are optimum for Spec Miata? Joel, based on your experience running on the current springs, do you want to give your perspective first, or should we turn this over to Penske or to Josh?
In terms, when you say the current spring, just give me a bit of background on that real quick. You mean the current one on the car, or the new Penske?
With the current spring rates, I don't think the Penske's, but Josh, you want to help me out here?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I can certainly elaborate. So we didn't look to change the current spring and bar package of the car. That was going to be too drastic of a change for the community, and that was going to be asking a lot. That being said, Spec Miata has worked well over the years on these current springs, and now we're just elevating the package as a total and bringing a proper shock into the equation. There's certainly other avenues to explore, but the cost prohibited to do so just does not match what we're looking for in Spec Miata.
Yeah, and then from the driving side, I don't think we need to change the spring as well as the damper. I mean, the damper provided so much benefit just by putting on there with what the current spring rate is. So I don't think we would probably have to go down that road. It's a great upgrade just with the damper.
Great, thank you, gentlemen. Okay, from John, can you share the general valving of the shocks? Will they be linear slash linear, linear slash digressive, etc.?
As far as that goes, I mean, we have a certain piston that's in there. It's a linear-based piston, but it does have dish to it to give initial low-speed support. So that's where, with the proper piston and shim stack in there, you're gonna be able to have the low-speed damping that gives you that support and stability. But then with the flow of the piston itself, it's gonna allow it to be compliant and get through bumps and things like that.
If these shocks are set at the optimum, how would tampering be advantageous to anyone?
Through our years of experience with racers, it doesn't matter how good it is, they always think they can make it better. So, but no, I mean, ultimately that's what it is. I mean, we want to provide, that was one of our goals that we feel is, if you have a proper race shock that feels very good, the racers will ultimately look somewhere else to look for an advantage. Ultimately, the shock is going to be very good. But yeah, I mean, racers are racers, and inevitably somebody's going to want to try something. But hopefully, with the tamper-proof way that we have it going and things like that, it's going to be much more difficult and not advantageous for them to do that.
And when you say much more difficult, so does that mean it's possible or impossible?
Nothing's impossible, but if they were to try to take this shock apart, you're looking at a very extensive way to reproduce a body, which is not easy to do. A lot of competitors that we deal with, they struggle to try to maintain our quality of body. So for somebody else to do that on their own, it's going to be very, very expensive. And again, the shock itself performs so well. To take it apart yourself and try to mess with that, you're not going to gain a whole lot. So again, that body, if you go to take that apart, you're going to ruin the body for sure, which means you have to now replace that body. And Penske will not sell that body to anybody unless Mazda Motorsports comes to us and says, hey, start selling that body.
The second point being, it's going to be impossible to inflate this damper properly without special tooling as well.
All right, that's great, and certainly we wouldn't go down that route. Keeping this essentially tamper-proof is the goal, even if there's no advantages. Otherwise, we're working very hard to ensure that. Okay, I think we're about at the end here. We got a question from John. Will a top mount kit require any of the Mazda parts, especially where it bolts to the chassis?
I will answer that one for you, David. The top mount kit will essentially be the same package we're used to dealing with before as a community. You will use the factory 99 top hat and then integrate the bump stop and mounting solution into it. There will be one modification that will be different, is you will have to slightly drill out the top of the factory hat to accept the new spherical bearing. I believe the dimension was a 15/16 hole. Bill, could you clarify that for me, if that was the exact dimension we've settled on?
Yeah, that is the dimension, and we will include that spec and a tolerance in the instructions for the kit.
Thank you, sir.
All right, we've got one more here. It just came in from Lee. I think it's circling back about the shock spring relationship and why we didn't make a change with the springs. So I'd probably go back to Joel Miller's response and to Josh's, but do we want to elaborate further, gentlemen? The question is, as we stuck with the wrong shock/spring relationship for 18 years, why wouldn't this have been a good time to have a cohesive package? Not much thought went into the original spring.
So just I'll start from the driving side myself, Randy, as well as Dean there. When we were driving, drove on the old package, and then we switched over to the new package here. We did talk about springs. That was part of the conversation, and we said when we did the testing, is a different spring needed? And across the three of us, it wouldn't be a huge change. So we wouldn't want to change, let's say, for 50 pounds, make everybody also do a spring as well. The damper, the cool part about it is it tackles a lot of different areas, whether that's, compression areas, whether that's rebound areas. So I think you guys will see once you try it, that if you think, we need to do this with the spring, the damper is going to control that a little bit. And you won't have to now go down that road. So it was just an alleviation of a potential extra cost when we made the decision. That's just from the driving side, because the damper was so good that it actually changed the whole dynamic a little bit.
And I would agree with what Joel added. And the difficult part here is everybody wants the best possible thing that you can have, but in a spec series, when everybody is stuck on the same criteria, then it evens the playing field, so to speak, without introducing extra cost. There are other class for producing the ultimate handling Miata. Spec Miata is a very good handling car and a very raceable car. Is it an E-Prod car? Is it a GT2 car by any means? No, but that wasn't the goal when we set out to do this. And to make the community be forced an additional change on top of what we were already doing, we just felt that the performance benefits were not there to support it.
Well, gentlemen and ladies in the audience, really appreciate everybody's time. We have certainly gone over what we anticipated, but a lot of wonderful questions. So thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you for the support. Again, we'll post this recording onto YouTube and share that here this afternoon with all those who registered, and then through our weekly newsletter. If you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to call us at Mazda Motorsports. If we do need to get an expert answer on a topic that we're not as familiar with, such as one from Penske, or if it's more rules related, we might then refer you to NASA or to SCCA. And again, really appreciate NASA, SCCA, Penske, Joel, John, and Randy, and everybody who joined. And enjoy your afternoon. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, David.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.